Welcome to Prime Suspects for your weekly insider's look behind the counter of Prime Sports. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics: the football weekend that was for Prime, some tough love for Prime and a test of U.S. sports betting apps, and the surprising rationale behind DraftKings revising its revenue guidance downward. Starting as we always do, guys, with the latest from Inside Prime Sports. Adam, yet another strong showing on your Saturday Twitter live stream with Scott, aka Vegas Horse Pools, going 2-0 with Tampa Bay plus 6.5 hosting San Francisco, as well as Jacksonville plus 7 hosting Minnesota. I realize touting isn't your thing, but with your current run of success, it's getting, I think, more impressive by the week.
Yeah, we're on a roll. I think it's 6 weeks in a row now. We're about 8-0. We had 1 week off, and that's just part of the game. But yeah, it's been surprisingly astonishing. I'm glad we're recording this, because even if I was having a conversation with myself, I wouldn't believe it. Being there, But this week, it was, dogs and unders. We actually won in Ohio on the NFL, lost in New Jersey. But all in all, it was a solid week. We also won on live, lost on pre. So contrary to literally the previous 8 to 10 weeks, the numbers have flipped. So it does show that we can actually have results that exist in another manner than what we thought was the only way to lose and win. We had some really good basketball results. Soccer was good. Tennis was good. Ice hockey was good. It was across the board a really good live week in New Jersey and Ohio. But yeah, just keeping at it. Few really good results that could have actually taken next level. Tampa Bay being one, if they had won outright. A couple of results. Sunday night fell on the number and the total. So really promising stuff from seeing the numbers Monday morning based on how some of those games fell and the potential upside that we could have had.
Glad to hear plenty of good news when it comes to Prime's bottom line, because if we want to pivot to our water cooler segment, focusing on Prime's app where people interact with your guys' betting lines, Eilers Krejcik's latest U.S. sportsbook app testing results are in, and let's just say there's plenty of upward mobility for Prime in this area. The Eilers Krejcik test included Prime for the first time, and per the November 6th episode of the Zero Latency podcast, Prime failed to score well virtually across the board, and especially with regard to its user interface. So let's just say Prime's debut was less like the sensational rookie season Jaden Daniels is having, maybe a bit more like Bryce Young's rookie campaign last year. But let's also remember, Peyton Manning threw 28 interceptions as a rookie, which is to say that improvement is squarely on the table. Joe, want to bring you into the conversation here. On Twitter, you posted, "It's tough to get critiqued, but worse not to welcome criticism and get better." How will you use this critique to get better?
I think, well, one, thank you again to the Eilers Krejcik guys. It's interesting that, I guess, in some ways, complimentary, that in their podcasts, of course, they led with the battle between FanDuel and DraftKings for the top spot, but then going in their second segment immediately to us, they didn't do that for Zen Sports or Better or anybody like that when they entered the market and they started evaluating them. So there must be something about Prime that merits their consideration. And of course there is. I think it was the tester whose name I forget. Or no, maybe it was Brad, the host. He said, Prime is essentially trying to take the position of a stripped down offshore sportsbook. And yes, 100%, that's where we're at. So by that measure, we kind of knew that we weren't going to fit in with that crowd in the first place anyway. I think it's excellent when you have, serious people take a really in-depth look at your product. And they shared an awful lot of feedback on that. I think that they were actually quite gentle in their comments on the podcast. It could have been much more brutal and has been brutal at times. But I think it also, you got to sit there and you got to be willing to take criticism. And you got to be not only self-criticism, but when smart people who know a lot about this industry and focus on this kind of thing, when they provide feedback, you got to take it. But at the same time, don't lose your mind, okay? Because you also at the same time have to, hold fast to what your vision of what your product is going to be. And we are not like all those other guys. That's not to say like, oh, the Eilers and Krejcik guys were wrong in their assessment. I think I've said a number of times in the past, we're kind of in a different business than what those guys are doing at Fan Kings. They're in a recreational player, soft player, fan engagement, entertainment mode. That's very much not what we do. And you can see that reflected in our product. So having said that, anytime that you get feedback on your product, you have to be all ears. And also, that report, which I haven't read in total yet, it's a great way of looking at the other people in the industry. You should always be open to these experiences. You should always be open to that kind of knowledge. And you got to have, and it's a show of strength when you sit there and you take the slings and arrows rather than sit there and try and deny, where you're at in this place. I think Adam and his team, and I'm sure he's going to talk about it, so I will try not to take too many of his words. We're already working on a number of those things that probably would have been covered in the next one that they're going to be doing. So thank you for validating that that's where we're supposed to be going, guys. But at the same time, I don't think we lose our minds and suddenly say, like, go into panic mode that we're not enough like FanDuel and DraftKings and Fanatics and people like that. We got to remember what business we're in, who our customer is, what they typically look for, which I think we know better potentially than the guys at Eilers and Krejcik. But yeah, thank you for the feedback and look forward to the next report.
Adam, building on Joe's remarks, we'll appreciate any specifics you can share when it comes to any improvements that may well be in store for the Prime Sports app. And more broadly, I'd be curious for your point of view on what may be a bit of a delicate balancing act between catering to bigger bettors who don't need the bells and whistles and the need for a more welcoming app experience to achieve meaningful scale.
Yeah, so for me, there was no critique at all in a sense of they're late to the party. They highlighted things that we've discussed for years. The conversation that I have between the left and right ear and with teams and whatnot is exactly what should this look like? What should the UI experience be? Because we're not like any of the others. I'm curious, and again, it was glad to finally, be in that list, look at it, hear back. I don't know if they've done Circa in that list as well to sort of see the kind of feedback, because they've got somewhat of a similar basis of, very straightforward, the way it's structured. Ultimately, again, it's what is the goal here? We are not the pure recreational thing with lots of casino interactions on the UI, lots of recommended bets. We're kind of, again, we're looking for the customer that knows what they want and can go find it easily and place their bets and get what they need versus having to tell them and give them the answer and sort of direct them where they're going to go. So that's where, and for me, these kind of things have been around for 20 years. I very much dislike the Bet365 interface and the way you got to navigate and things like that. Whereas, there's others that I've used for a very long time that are very simplistic. I can get where I want to go, and it's just a matter of adding, a search bar or a few little things along the way. So this is kind of an internal discussion that has had for years that Eilers and Krejcik have kind of finally shown up to the party and highlighted it. One of the words that I've really heard since that thing come out was tunnel vision. Whether it's their tunnel vision in the way that they look at things, whether it's our tunnel vision as to how we look at what we are and where we fit, we know that there's a hybrid in the middle. We're not going to go all the way to the left. We're, currently all the way to the right, but there's somewhere in the middle with all this stuff that there's a balance and finding out where that ultimately is. And definitely not worrying too much about what they see and more what our customers see and what the feedback is from them. And we've gotten the same sort of thing, good and bad. We're looking at, having a potential new UI going into the summer next year. A lot of our walkout now from here to that 2026 World Cup is what are the big ticket items we need to tackle? Some of the basic things like the sign up, the KYC process, like those kind of things of talking about the funnels is another big word I've heard lately. That is just trying to get them to your front door, make sure the experience is as frictionless as possible to get signed up, which we sort of did a project a week and a half ago when a bunch of us were in New Jersey of looking at what everyone else is doing, looking at what we're doing. And we've made some internal mistakes. We've seen on the operator side with how maybe they've configured a LexisNexis on the KYC that they haven't done it to be as player friendly as what was possible, with also staying within the regulatory guidelines and all those kind of things as well. So it's really just a pure strip it down and rebuild it back up piece by piece. But ultimately, what a group of people do as feedback in that central sort of document or podcast, whatnot, doesn't have any kind of reflection on what we're looking from the players and getting them to the front door, walking them through and seeing what their feedback is. You have a 40, 50-year-old guy that's on the app, and it's like, they know what it is. They've been betting that way for 10, 15 years. That's regulating the unregulated. We've been loud about it and saying that's our goal here, versus a 20-year-old kid that I actually had a conversation with one of our IT guys yesterday when I did a bit of a town hall. Was he brought up, he looks at our app and then he sort of sees stake and some of those other ones and sort of asks why we're going this route and not another route. So we have the ecosystem within of all the age groups, the players, casino guys, sports guys, all those kind of things. So the customer feedback will ultimately win out on this. But again, we've kind of said who we are and what we're trying to achieve, and that's a niche and a certain market share. Yes, we need to probably lean into some of the other space, but we're not there right now, and I don't think we need to be. It's just take the feedback. We have thick skins. You're not hurting our feelings. We appreciate everything that comes across the board from all the other operators, because we're selling chocolate ice cream and they're all selling vanilla. So we expect some differences of opinion.
All right, well, from Prime's app to the sportsbook with the app that topped the Eilers and Krejcik test, our look-ahead segment this week, we'll shift our sights to DraftKings, and while their app is on the rise, their revenue guidance is not. DraftKings last week revised its 2024 revenue guidance downward due to the impact of, quote, customer-friendly outcomes, unquote. Adam, we'll start with you here. I can't help noticing the irony of reading that news about a book known to cater to bettors who gravitate toward favorites and overs, leading up to a week of NFL sides and totals that were very friendly to underdogs and unders. And as we mentioned, you were on two of those underdogs that cashed. What's your response to the customer-friendly outcomes positioning?
Well, if they had just waited one more week for this announcement, then maybe they could have, got their number back up there. I imagine they had to have had a decent weekend.
Not 250 million worth. That's for sure.
This is kind of the, if you build it, that's what you get. They're looking for the recreational player. We've always said we're not dying by 1 week results, 1 month results, 1 quarter results, 1 half year results. We're looking at things by season, by year, by 2 years, by 3 years. And as I learn more and get educated more on public companies and the way that they look at things, and they're so worried about their quarter and the outside perception of the stock price and all those kind of things, which, seems to fluctuate for no real reason at times. If they just opened up their doors and were an all-welcoming sports book and had balanced books, they have the kind of liquidity that with another 1,000 bettors that could fill in that spot of avoiding the pain of those customer-friendly results, they wouldn't have anything to complain about. They'd have a lot better product. The great thing is, I don't think no matter how many times we say this, they're actually going to do this. So there's no fear of them wiping us off the map for our niche market, because they're so worried about that quarter or that half or that weekend or whatnot. It just doesn't matter. If you've been in this business long enough, as a bettor, as an operator, as anything like this, these things come in swings. And they should be plotting and planning their 2026, 2027, just accepting the results that are. But again, public company, I know they're, answering to thousands or tens of thousands of people at the end of the day. But yeah, it's much ado about nothing.
Joe, we'll go off script for a bit here to toss it to you. A couple questions coming your way. First off, building on Adam's notes about DraftKings being a publicly traded company, how do you think that dynamic changes things for their public positioning relative to what other operators might say under similar circumstances?
Well, they're just in a different game. Their value creation is in their shareholder price, and they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to maximize that value. What their bottom line is in their betting revenue affects that, but it's not their primary thing. Like Adam, myself, and we're living and dying on our revenues. We're living and dying on our hold. That's the only measure that we really have. We don't have publicly traded shares in the background where we can console ourselves that, like, Adam, we had a couple of weeks of customer-friendly sport outcomes, but, we're still trading at 20x our revenue, and, we're still worth, a couple of $1 billion. It's a different game. It's a different perspective. And I guess that's to be expected in that case.
And knowing that the customer-friendly outcomes phrasing also caught your attention, in the spirit of this being our look-ahead segment, what do you make of that positioning and what it says to you about where the industry is heading?
I'll tell you, it's another signpost on the road of all the newbies that have come into this industry since PASPA was overturned. They really are changing the face of it. I mean, they're not finding any new sources of truth. Sports betting is sports betting, but they sure as heck are finding new ways to put, old wine in a new bottle to make it look shinier, newer, and more attractive. And their euphemism for losses is just one example of that. And again, it feeds that, if they actually use the word losses in their reports to the public markets, that's a bad word. Customer-friendly sport outcomes, there's so much goddamn positivity in that. I almost feel like, hey, they did a good thing, didn't they? Right? So I guess what it always reminds me of, I'm sure all of us have seen the movie Animal House, and it's the riot at the end. And I always think of that scene that has Kevin Bacon as an ROTC guy standing in the middle of the riot with people running back and forth around him. And he's saying, like, be calm, all is well. And then he gets trampled flat. That's kind of what this type of statement strikes me as. It's like, yes, we had to adjust our guidance by $250 million, but all is well.
All right, well, to the audience, we'll tie a bow around this episode with one customer-friendly outcome you can continue to bet on. Joe and Adam telling it like it is right here on this show, week in and week out. Thanks as always for making us a part of your week, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.